I'm Alex of Manic Games. I am a technical artist and I'm here to talk about what technical art is. I'll give a bit of background about myself. I studied 3D art at AIE a few years ago. I did all the normal stuff like making characters and environments, but I ended up being more interested in the technical art perspective. So that covers a bunch of different stuff. So we've got shaders, which is about like the visuals of how the game looks, the effects, so explosions and blood and that kind of thing. We have rigging, so like the skeleton of how something moves and being able to control it for animators, and a bit of tools, so making artists' life quicker by being able to program stuff so they can get things out faster. Technical art is an interesting field because it mixes both being an artist and being a programmer. So you need to both have sort of the creative and visual brain and also have the technical brain. What that means is you understand the art side of things, but how it actually works. You know how lighting bounces off surfaces, you know how muscles work on the inside of people's bodies and stuff, and then how you would simulate that. Let's give an example. I'm creating a dungeon crawler at the moment. It's a bit grungy, it's dark, the lighting is sort of supposed to give you a bit of a sense of fear and confusion. You're not supposed to know exactly what you're seeing. And so because of that, as a tech artist, I can make assets to make the dungeon actually work, which is sort of more to the 3D art point of view, but I'm making the lighting, I'm making it crunchy, I'm making it the technical side of things to make it that feeling be evoked. So in this example here, I've got a little dungeon, so we've got this prison and we've got zombies that are moving around in this prison. I specifically wanted to create an effect that makes the shadows very deep and dark. So in this area, for example, it's super dark here, and if I move over to this section, so we've got a hallway right now, we've got my little T-posing character, and back in the distance you can't see anything. And so to do this, I did a few things. To get this shader to work, I used shader graph. So I'm using Unity right now, and this shader graph is basically everything I've done to be able to make the visuals work. So this is calculating the surface and where the lights are and where the player is looking at, moving the color around and changing it to be dithered so it's all pixelated and such. And this is what this whole thing is doing here. A bit of a spaghetti nightmare, but I try my best. And this sort of allows me to create this little pixel dither effect. So this is what normal Unity lighting will look like. And people will ask, why would I choose Unity or Unreal? Unreal will give you a lot of really good lighting from default. It'll sort of throw you out there, make it look really nice and realistic. Unity kind of has stuff from a bit of a more basic point of view. So this is maybe what like Unity might look like without much happening. Pretty boring looking, pretty flat, very clearly 3D and gross. But Unity, because it's so simple, lets me kind of fundamentally change how things are calculated. So in my case, I've been able to make it look like that it's all sort of made of pixels and make the lighting kind of slowly fade off and become really crunchy. So if I move this character to the background, it kind of like fades in a spooky sort of way. A part of this is using shader graph, but also sometimes you'll actually use code. So this code is calculating the way the lights are working, and I tricked around with this for a little bit to make sure that I'm getting the special sort of lighting I want, and this way I can kind of fundamentally change what the core of the engine is doing. Let me give a very specific example of how I would use shaders and lighting to solve a very specific problem of this game. So this game I'm currently making, called Pitchfork, is a procedural dungeon crawler. So the dungeons are created from scratch every single time. Putting a ton of lights in a level is very expensive. The more lights you have, the more the computer will chug and slow down. That's why you get bad frame rate on certain games, especially if you have a weaker computer. So what I need to do is figure out a way to make lights cheaper or make it so that one light can do more things. So in my case, just from a game design point of view, I've specifically chosen a game that is in the dark. So I'm actually using light to be a part of the game design, which means I don't have to worry about having so many lights in all the places. But something else I've done is actually make it so that the lights can kind of bounce everywhere. They kind of spread around corners a lot more. So I can give an example here. If I make this light really weak and put it in the middle, I can increase the range of it. And you can see here, even though I've got one tiny little light, it's just one little guy in the middle lighting this entire room. So rather than having like multiple torches all hanging along different areas and having to do like ray tracing or something like that, I've changed the code of lighting itself so the light will fall off and light more things. So I can have specific torches that have like a specific amount of intensity and stuff. And that means that I wouldn't have to change the environment too much. All I have to do is go to a light, change its color to anything else, and then now suddenly this feels like kind of a new room. It feels like a new spot, and it's able to light a lot of what's going on in there. That required me, again, to actually change the shader's code. So now I've got it so that it's gonna spray out a little bit more. And then again, also change like the fundamental structure of how math is calculated in lighting. So something else a tech artist needs to do, create rigs. And a rig is basically the puppet, the 3D puppet that an animator will use when they're creating animation for a game or a film, anything. Rigging's one of those really versatile skills in that you can use it for games, but you can also use it for films and advertising and such. But the fundamentals of it are allowing an animator to get a character to move. I'm animating at the moment a first-person character. And so because I'm animating a first-person character, this is what it looks like. You just see the arms. There's no head and no rest of the body. So we've got various different animations that are going on. This character stabbing with a pitchfork, jumping, moving up and down. But how do I actually get it to be able to be animated like this? This is what we need rigging for. This is what my rig looks like. We have the geometry itself, which is these pieces here. So this is like, I 3D modeled this and sculpted it in Maya and ZBrush. And then after putting it back into Maya, I attached something called bones to the actual model itself. So that's these little dots here. And what they do is basically attach the geometry to specific points so they can be animated. So by default, I'll have an arm here and a bone maybe in the elbow or something. And then I can actually move the geometry by attaching different points to the bone itself. We call this skinning in rigging, and that allows me to be able to now move the geometry. So I can move the bones around, the geometry itself will follow. After we make the bones, we then need to make controllers. So we don't ever actually animate the bones directly. We animate controllers on the top. So if you imagine the bones in a puppet are little joints that rotate around, the controllers or the rig itself is the strings that go to the top of the puppet controller. In this case, I have these little controllers for the hands. So if I move these around, I can move different parts of the hands. I can close and enclose the fingers and such like that. In my case, because I'm using first person, I actually also have the camera as a control, and that means that I can do some fun animations. Rigger is also doing a few more technical things with props itself. So I might have a pole arm such as this. So I've got a little pitchfork here. And at the moment, I can rotate this pitchfork so that it's moved to a specific location. But if I have an animator try and move this hand onto the pitchfork every single time, it's going to get, really tedious. So what I've set up for my animator is an ability for them to be able to actually attach the hand itself to the spear or pitchfork. So now whenever I move this hand, I'm also moving this hand as well. So let's have a look at what that actually looks like back in our animation. In our animation here, you can see that if I move through stuff like this spear thrust, then this part of the hand is staying connected to the polearm itself. And so that means that my animator doesn't have to keep moving the hand right onto that little point. So a rigger is doing a bunch of different things. It's creating the puppet itself for the animator to be able to create things. It's adding little features like being able to attach hands to different objects, maybe be able to sheath a sword, be able to make animation, like facial animation movements. A rigger will also need to know some code sometimes too. In the case of Maya, I'd need to know either Python or Mel script. So I'd actually be coding various little things to be able to make tools for my riggers to make stuff quicker. A whole bunch of technical process to be able to make these animations work in the first place. Let's talk about what an environment artist might be doing. An environment artist is going to be a bit of a specialization in 3D art. So this is 3D modeling, it's texturing, it's being able to plan how you put an environment together. I'm going to show this case of how I would do it with a dungeon or sort of an interior procedurally generated game. I have these rooms that I've created, and these rooms are all made of modular parts. If I go into Maya, I'll show a little bit of what they look like here. So I've got this huge amount of things in Maya, which is me planning all the elements of the scene I want. So I've got, these are what my walls want to look like. These are what stairs are going to be. This is the floor. Here's a bunch of other little assets. And basically what I need to do is plan out exactly what assets I need to be put in an environment. To plan what assets I need to put into my environment, I'll usually create a big board of random reference images from various games or architecture and such, and then create a list of these assets and then start making them in Maya to figure out where they need to go. So I went into Elden Ring and played around a bunch of their dungeons. I planned out what kind of stuff I want in my levels, and then kind of took individual screenshots of different elements that I liked, different parts of the floor and stairs and arches. And then now I'm making a list of everything that I need. After I've done that, I put it into Maya, and now I'm going through the very tedious process of thinking about how all these things snap into place. I've specifically made this wall to be 4 by 4 meters, and that way, if I ever get a pillar, I can exactly snap it to where it needs to go. When you're making environments that are modular, you're basically putting together like Lego pieces, but you're making how the puzzle actually connects together. And this is a big challenge. In my case, I need to figure out if I have, say, these wooden beams at the corner of a room, then what does it look like if they're in the corner of the room? What happens if the corner goes to another angle? How does it snap together if it suddenly turns into stone? These are all these tiny little tricks I need to make. And here's a little example of, like, you would think I need one pillar to be able to put something in a dungeon, but I've got all these different types of pillars. I've got these thin ones, I've got ones that only show one side of it, I've got these little triangle ones, I've got ones that are just for corners, I've got ones that are going to go on every single angle. And I'm all kind of like figuring out how these all fit together in one big puzzle piece. Something else an environment artist needs to do is create the textures. The more technical side of texture creation are making textures that will tile. Something that if I put them across a landscape or across a structure that you're not going to see as repeating and can be used in different places. So in my case, I've got these little like square tiles that I can put all throughout my dungeon. I've got various other pieces that I can attach to different things. One of the most technical places that you'll do texturing is a place called Substance Designer. Substance Designer is an Adobe product, and it allows me to basically procedurally generate textures. So I've got this texture here, which is different layers of bricks and stone patterns that I want to create. And from one example, I can show that I start off with this little gradient. I split it out into different pieces, and then I'm able to slowly kind of construct different brick elements of it, add different color variation to it, add kind of like little bits of grunge and wear and tear, add it back to the rest of this object. So I've got all of these different pieces here. I can now create different maps that this controls the lighting and how things bounce off things. This controls the shadows, so it makes, you know, deeper shadows in these various points. And then this is the actual like color of the object itself. This can be pretty complicated and become spaghetti after a while, but it's extremely powerful. because if I make one change to an asset, if I change the way that a certain texture moves, it'll flow on and change everything else. And that means that if I want to change this brick pattern here to be another color, let's say change this to be a darker purple or something like that, if I hit save, that will now then go into the engine itself. And I can make tons and tons of changes without having to worry about like going over paint strokes again in some sort of 2D app like Photoshop or Critter or Procreate. So Substance Designer is a very powerful and technical tool that an environment artist can have in their tool belt. Yeah, this is the dungeon that I've got in this game. So using all the assets that I talked about here, little multiplayer thing with my little guy here. I have a torch and I can light different things, and you can see like the way I've got a lighting kind of procedurally lighting up a place, and it makes it look kind of all spooky and crunchy and retro. Oh, we got a guy. Ah! So these levels are procedurally generated. So all of the assets that I made, I created into different rooms. So some of the stuff you would have seen in Maya, but now all of the like rooms are connected in various different ways. So I can have different rooms that randomly spawn together. Sometimes things will be dead ends, other times things will lead to new places. So, and the lighting kind of like gives it this sense of kind of crunchy spookiness. I'm kind of trying to evoke some old school RPG style. I'm not going like full retro, but I'm kind of got a bit of those old crunchy rulebook stuff.